All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, hello and welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started, could you please just type in that you can hear me and see the first slide on your screens? If you can, type in yes. Okay, fantastic. I've got lots of yeses coming through. Well, welcome to today's webinar, Introducing the CPD Framework. This is Sophie from English Australia speaking. And thank you for all coming. Today is actually not only the webinar, but the official launch of the CPD Framework. So a special thank you for being present today for this proud moment for English Australia. I'm going to introduce today's speakers. So I'll be presenting, and with me is Claire McGrath and Dave Fox. And Claire and Dave are two members of the steering committee that have developed the CPD framework with English Australia. So we're really grateful to Claire and Dave for presenting today and also for being members on the steering committee and for all the work that you have done. Claire is currently a teacher trainer and the acting director at ATIC, Australian TESOL Training Centre in Sydney, which is part of Navitas. And she works with pre-service and in-service teachers in both ELICOS and in AMEP programs. Claire has had a very fruitful career. She's previously worked in Japan, Chile, China, and Australia as a teacher, senior teacher, head teacher, and DOS. Dave also has had a really interesting career. He's currently the training manager at Lexus TESOL Training Centres, and he's based in Noosa, which is a pretty nice place to be based, I imagine. And Dave has worked in ELICOS or in EFL, the TEFL industry, for the last 15 years. And during this time, he's worked in Europe, the UK and Australia as a teacher, teacher trainer, DOS and principal. So I'm very lucky to be presenting alongside these two wonderful people today. In today's webinar, we're really going to be introducing the CPD framework. And because this is the first time we're bringing it out to everybody, we hope that by the end of the webinar, you'll feel confident using the CPD framework, but that also you'll understand a little bit of the background and the background to the framework and some of its foundations. So in the webinar today, we'll be talking about the rationale for developing the CPD framework, the process of development, some of the assumptions of the framework, especially how to use the framework and the 4 easy steps involved in using the framework. We'll be going through the CPD weightings and the CPD points and how they work so that everybody understands the system. We'd also like to talk about how colleges can incorporate the CPD framework into their own professional development programs. At the end, I'll talk a little bit about future plans for the framework, and then we'll take some questions or comments from you guys from the audience. So as we're presenting, if things do come up for you, please just wait until the end and then you can ask your questions. All right, well, let's get started. I guess the first question to ask is, why did English Australia decide to develop a CPD framework? And look, this is a very valid question given that there are other professional development frameworks for teachers out there in the industry. And I think one of the main reasons for English Australia was that we wanted a professional development framework that was suitable for the Australian context. So other frameworks that are out there really are quite broad in that people from all over the world interact with them and use them. And we wanted something that was really targeted at our own context. And of course, the other reason was that English Australia really sees as part of its remit that we try to raise the standards within ELICOS in Australia. And I guess the CPD framework is an attempt to continue raising the standard of teaching throughout the industry in Australia. So now that the framework's been developed, we really feel that it has value for the industry and in various aspects. And I guess I'd like to just highlight to you the main aspects of that value today. So firstly, we think that teachers or managers or mentors don't always know what's out there in the world of professional development. And a CPD framework is a nice way to bring things together and to hook professional development on and house in a place where people can find it. Also, our members tell us that it's really difficult to find the resources and the personnel to develop effective in-house professional development programs. And the CPD framework is really a way of supporting our member colleges for them to have an extra tool to use in their professional development with their staff. And it's also something that caters for all phases of teacher development. So members often say to us that the difficult thing with their professional development programs is catering for the level of experience and expertise among their teachers. And the CPD framework, we hope, does assist colleges with that. On an individual level, because the CPD framework is for teachers, on an individual teacher level, we feel that the framework really provides structured delivery of a variety of PD content for teachers so that teachers can have a more systematic way of approaching their professional development. So the CPD framework provides a system for teachers to document and track all of the professional development activities that they take part in and really be systematic in targeting the areas that they need to work on. We also know that within ELICOS, there are a lot of casual teachers who, because there is a lot of sessional work in ELICOS, may migrate between colleges. And the CPD framework is really a way for these teachers to take control of their own professional development and be able to continue it whilst they may be migrating between colleges, and also document this to show to prospective employers. And finally, we feel that the real value of the CPD framework is that it provides guidelines on the amount of professional development that should be undertaken annually, because often we don't always know how much we should be doing in the way of professional development. And the framework really just provides some quantifiable guidelines about how much professional development is the right amount. I'm going to talk a little bit now about the framework development and the process that was used to develop the framework. And I think the best place for me to start is with the CPD Framework Steering Committee members. So basically, English Australia decided that it wanted to develop this framework, and it went out and approached people who they felt were experts in the area of teacher training and professional development. And we put together a group of 4 steering committee members who are listed on the screen: Sarah Bissell from Griffith English Language Institute, Jennifer Costa from Monash University, Dave from Lexis and Claire from Attic or Navitas in Sydney. And really, the steering committee is a mix of people who have expertise in teacher training and also people who have expertise in running professional development programs with a large number of staff. So we felt that that balance was important. And in the beginning, the committee was working with my predecessor, or the person who was working for me when I was on maternity leave, Aparna Jacob. So I do have to thank Aparna for those early phases of the development of the framework and for leading the process right through until when I came back from maternity leave. So Aparna and the committee got together and they researched the area in the beginning. So they looked at not only CPD frameworks within ELT, but they looked at CPD frameworks from other industries like engineering or the logisticians CPD framework. I think the accounting CPD framework, some frameworks for teachers in Victoria, and they researched what other professional development frameworks looked like. And that's when the idea of points and, you know, the points and weighting system really was the seed of that idea. So after the research, there was a series of meetings and emails and drafts of the CPD framework, many interesting and fun discussions with the committee members. And finally, a draft CPD framework was developed. Once English Australia had the draft CPD framework, we took it out to our member base, and nationally, Brett Blacker, who is the English Australia CEO, visited all of the branches with the draft framework and consulted them and asked for their feedback. And this happened in May and June of this year. And probably a lot of the people who are attending the webinar today also attended one of those sessions. That feedback was really invaluable. And with that feedback, the steering committee got together again and tweaked the draft framework and came up with the version that is available today and that we're launching today. As part of that process, English Australia also sought independent advice from a CPD framework expert, Fran Morris, and she has worked on various CPD frameworks for lots of different industries, and she took a look at ours and was really just the person who gave it the final okay in terms of it being a robust framework. So that was just a little bit of background to the development of the framework, and now we're going to move on to talk about the framework itself. Dave and Claire are going to talk more about the nuts and bolts of the framework and how teachers and managers can interact with it. I'm just going to talk a little bit now about the assumptions of the framework, or the foundations of the framework. So these are just things that need to be said, because if they're not said, they're probably going to be questions later. So they really inform the framework. The framework is designed to work in conjunction with in-house professional development programs that are already running at our colleges. And English Australia recognises that there are some fantastic professional development programs that are already running in our centres. And we hope that this framework will just enhance those professional development programs and hopefully make the lives of those running it a little easier by adding to the pool of contents available to those people. The framework uses the European profiling grid as the basis to define its phases of teacher development. So I encourage everybody, if they haven't seen the European profiling grid, to go and take a look at it, and you'll see that it is a framework for language teachers, and it has phases of teacher development across its horizontal axis at the top. And so does our framework. What we haven't done is develop a guide for people about what each phase on our framework means. And that's because we use the European Profiling Grid as this guide, essentially. So really the European Profiling Grid, or the E-Grid as it's referred to, is a very important document that feeds into our framework. The English Australia CPD Framework is designed for ELICOS teachers. That's not to say that AMEP teachers or high school preparation teachers can't use it, but really we had ELICOS teachers in mind when we designed it. And we had ELICOS teachers in mind, and we assume that these teachers have the necessary qualifications to teach ELICOS in Australia. One of the assumptions of our framework is that teachers' development won't be uniform across all of the competencies on the framework. So whereas for one competency, teachers may be phase 3 or going on to expert. In another competency, for example, intercultural competence, they may only be in a phase 1 or phase 2 stage of development and experience. So there'll be jagged development on the framework. Another assumption of our framework is that for content, we will draw on various different models of continuing professional development. For example, Cambridge English Teaching Framework. We may use some content from there on our framework for people to access. We may include resources from, for example, the British Council. And in the future, we hope to include member college resources and materials. So part of the implementation phase of the CPD framework will really be going out to colleges and seeing how they're using the framework and getting their feedback about activities and contents that we could include in our framework, and even hopefully receiving content from member colleges. Finally, the last very important thing to mention about the framework is that it will be continuously updated with content, and that we are expecting that it will evolve. It's probably not going to stay the same as it is today for the next 5 years. Hopefully, once we get feedback from the consumers of the framework, we'll be able to tweak it and develop it further. All right, that's it from me for now. I'm going to pass over to Claire, who's going to tell you a little bit more about how to use the framework.
Okay, so I just want to orient you to what it looks like. If you notice down the left-hand column there, dividing resources up into different areas, you know, the methodology, the how, looking at aspects of assessment, feedback, and so on. Resources related to planning, time management, the interaction with students, classroom management, but also customer service, and intercultural competence, which I think is a great example of why we need an Australian CPD framework, because we have a different profile of students here, multicultural, not just multilingual, so we're able to target the types of students we have, the types of courses they're attracted to, their backgrounds, and so on. There are also, you can see there in the left-hand column, moving towards the bottom, areas of specialisation that are possible, and then moving on down through to using different kinds of digital resources and encouraging research. So the topics down there, the areas for development, the skills and knowledge on the left. Now you'll see the columns going across are divided into phases, and we debated how we would identify those, given that the focus is very much on continuing professional development. There is a jagged profile amongst staff in terms of their experience and exposure to ideas. It's not necessarily to do with length of service, so we're not trying to identify anybody as where phase 1 is identified as a deficit. It's just a reality, but also recognising sometimes that people will be, you know, showing that jagged profile. I'd like to also draw your attention to the fact that some of those activities are repeated in different phases. So just to clarify that, if you look down the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the key clarifying what types of activities there are at present: webinars, readings, workshops. We'll talk more about the credit points and weightings later. But if you just go back up to, say, phase 1, there's a webinar there, also repeated in phase 2, about exploiting real life in the classroom using a Meet ELT workshop that we had in Sydney a while back. So this is another good example of how this is very dynamic for the individual teachers in contributing to the resources that are here. So it's not just to aid the academic managers, but it's also to encourage the individual teachers to be involved in using this, but also contributing to it. Okay, so Soph, can you move on? I've lost control. Here we go. All right, just go back there. Dave's going to talk more about some parts of this, but just getting that idea of the overall way we were hoping it would be used. There we are with the 4 easy steps. So the first step in the individual, identifying their own individual needs and then looking for ways to meet that. We'll talk more about that. And also the fact that there are options within this, depending on which tools you use, where you might be collating the needs of different members of your staff as an academic manager, so you can get a profile of your your staff more easily. Once that's done, matching those needs to what's available in the framework, and if there's something not there, feeding back to EA about what's missing, what could be added to it. The third step is not just recording, actually, it's where you do the activity that you've chosen to meet your needs, and there is a template you'll see soon about recording that. Very much a major step is this fourth one, that whole cycle of reflection and what happens next, discussing, sharing ideas, trying things out, going back to your original needs and seeing how those have changed and identifying what you need now. So Dave.
Yes, hi, thanks for that. I just want to look at what I think is probably one of the hardest steps, which is the step 1, which is determining what our needs are as individual teachers, or as our teachers' needs are if we're an academic manager. I've spent a lot of time trying to figure this out in my early stages of my career and didn't really have a lot to go on. And even just looking at some descriptors in a framework makes it kind of tough to figure out where you are. You've got to have a certain amount of self-awareness. So one of the great things that Cambridge have brought out is the Cambridge English Development Tracker, which we'll look at a bit more in detail in a second. You can use this to make a self-assessment, but you can also use the self-assessment tool on the eGrid for teachers. That's one way of figuring out what you need as a person. Or as a teacher, you might want to request areas for development from your academic managers. Most academic managers should have a fairly good idea of their teachers' strengths and areas for development. But it might make it a little bit less teacher-centered there. Another good way of doing it would be to look at any recent observation feedback that the teachers might have had, or you might have had as a teacher, and use that to try and figure out which areas you need to do some more development on. But what I'd like to look through is what I find the easiest way to do it, and it's kind of handy as a teacher and an academic manager, and that's the Cambridge English Teacher Development Tracker. Sorry, Soph, I've lost control too. Can you switch to the next slide? Thank you. So this is, yeah, that's it. This is the login page for the Cambridge English Development Tracker. You basically create an account. It's all free. You create an account and take a self-assessment, and it'll record it for you. Or over time, you log back in and you do more self-assessments and see how you think you're going in different areas. Now, I really like this because it takes a lot of the guesswork out of it, a lot of it, not all of it, out of it for the individual. Sorry, can you change to the next one, please, Soph? So basically what you do here is you get a series of multiple choice questions, and you just have to click on your answer and move on to the next one. So, you know, how much do you understand about the theories of how people learn languages? I have a basic understanding, I have a reasonable understanding, I have a good understanding, I have a sophisticated understanding. So while I say it takes some of the guesswork out, you still have to kind of have that self-awareness to an extent, but it's a little easier than trying to come up with that yourself. Can you go to the next one, please, Soph? At the end of it, you get your own profile, and it looks at these 5 different categories and shows where you are on the Cambridge scale, which is not that different to what we've used here for English Australia. There is also an opportunity to drill down further into each section and look at the various things that make up, say, learning and the learner, and see where you are in relation to each. Now, the thing I like for both the teacher and for the academic manager is, if we can go to the next slide, is that you can see your profile, you can track it on the stage, and as an academic manager you could track all of your staff on there. In the past, I've had teachers that I've managed share their profiles with me. You can share them with anyone as a reviewer. And for me, it was really helpful in trying to customize the PD to everyone. So this, combined with the options in the English Australia CPD framework, make for a fairly comprehensive and well-informed choice for academic managers and for teachers themselves. Of course, for legal purposes, I have removed the names of any teachers and put in my own descriptors of them. And if we move on, I think we are back to Claire.
Yes, okay, so we're just going to have another closer look at that step 2. You've already seen this framework as it exists now. So having identified areas of need and interest, then going back to the grid and finding where those things are located in the grid, using the left-hand column, looking across to see where you might be, which things fit your needs. And if we have a closer look at the next slide, which is this part of the same framework, just a little bit bigger so you don't have to squint quite so much. Noticing just a range of different webinars, readings, workshops here, and the fact that this is ongoing. So this is going to be developed, it'll be added to, it may be that some things are not so useful, or we will just need extra things to cover gaps, and that's where I think this is a particularly beautiful thing, that EA is going to be seeking continual feedback on this, to have people input what's needed and suggest things that could be added from various resources they've developed themselves, or this, you know, as teachers or as academic managers, or that they've come across elsewhere. In terms of the weighting, if we go to the next slide, let's clarify that. The weighting's based partly on duration, you can see the length of activities, and also the mode or the level of input or involvement in the individual's activity. So whether they're passively attending something or they're interactive in the attendance. So for example, you can see on the right a webinar, attending passively, not contributing other than questions potentially in the chat, but attending a workshop and being more active in that workshop, doing something with others, but also wanting to encourage people to experiment, to consider designing, developing, leading a group workshop. And there you can see the duration. Even though the workshop itself might be an hour, we've factored in, assuming say 3 hours preparation on the part of the individual. Now you can play around with these. You don't actually have to use these weightings if you don't want to. You can ignore the points, you can adjust them for yourself if you wish, but this is an attempt to provide some kind of general standard across the whole of ELT in Australasia or Australia. If we go to the next slide, just clarifying a little bit more, this is just the suggested goal, and we were very mindful, bearing in mind our own experiences in a range of different contexts, the size of different centres, their capacity with their range of teachers or senior teachers, head teachers, DOSs, etc. Also recognising, you know, you have to be realistic in terms of some people's time. But the good thing about this, to repeat that point, that people who are making transitions between different employers are able to then use this in order to record what they're doing, but access ongoing professional development and not miss, as they move on from one centre to another, not miss you know, certain items that would fill in the gaps in their awareness and skill. So there's a little bit of flexibility there, but in the end we figured that 30 would be, you know, the ideal, but it's perhaps, you know, likely that some people might do more, and some people might do less, and some people might ignore this altogether. Okay, looking at the record, there's an editable template here where teachers record the activity. So in the first part, just recording what they did, the name of the activity is a copy and paste, the duration and the CPD points, which is pretty straightforward. Then the next part is, if you go to the next slide, you can see where they start not just recording, but this is where they use the same template to reflect on ideas and insights, key points they've picked up, to respond, you know, with questions or just their reactions to the ideas or the information that they have been exposed to, and also to identify what's the follow-through. So what are they planning to do, the action they're planning to take, and how to affect their own teaching. In terms of that action completed, yes, it's very hard to pinpoint when something finishes, but the expectation here is that this is going to be ongoing professional development. So it doesn't just stop with having done this and reflected on that one experience. There's follow-through, which Dave is going to clarify now with some examples.
Yeah, that was one of the big things that we were conscious of when we were doing this, was that just sitting and having an hour of watching a webinar and being passive, while you might get something out of it, it's not as useful unless you run with that and do something with it. So we came up with a couple of ways in which we could get more out of the things that are on the EA CPD framework. And the first example was just one that we came up with. A group of teachers or a teacher attends a workshop or a PD event. You then meet to discuss the topics, conduct peer observations on the topics, and then turn that into something else where you can lead a workshop for your colleagues. So sort of taking the initial PD task and then building on it and just trying to get as much out of it as possible and to pass that on to others. If we go on to the next one, there's another way of which you could do it. And this is a group of teachers choose a webinar. Before the webinar, do some prep, read the articles, discuss the topics, then attend the webinar and join the discussion on the English Australia blog, which there will be a blog post after each webinar. Going back to the staff room, holding your own discussion on the topic, and then turning that into a developmental observation by the academic manager. I mean, these were just two ways that we came up with at the time, but there are tons and tons of ways in which we could run with this as academics. And I guess that's kind of leading into where do we go from here?
Okay, so we've had a look at the CPD framework as it exists today, and as I mentioned before, there are lots of possibilities for where the framework will go in the future and how it will develop. I think something that's really important to remember is that the framework grid itself, which is that Word document with the competencies and the phases, will be continuously updated. So content will be added to it. For example, if there's an upcoming workshop, that content will be added. Workshops that have finished may be taken away. So if you're downloading that grid to place in your staff room somewhere, just be conscious that you'll need to do that on a regular basis. Another thing that English Australia is doing at the moment is creating a blog space, and this blog space is a really good place for us to continue conversations after webinars and after workshops have happened. So as Dave said, it's one thing to attend a professional development session, but what happens afterwards is equally, if not more, important. And I guess we were conscious of reflection being built into the framework, and conscious of that reflection not needing to be just individual reflection that's written down, but also reflection that's done as a group, and that discussion plays a part in. So the English Australia blog hopefully will allow teachers to continue discussions and continue with ideas that have been developed during webinars and workshops. Another goal of English Australia really is to make the record template more user-friendly for teachers. And at the moment, you saw that template where teachers can record their activities and reflect on them. And it's, all done manually. But really, we would like this to be an easy process where perhaps you could use drop-down menus to select the CPD credit points, and where you could just very easily cut and paste the names of sessions that you've attended. So English Australia is trying to develop a portal where teachers could access their own record template and also house it. And hopefully this template would have some autofill sections, and it would also be a place where statements of attendance could be stored for people so that these things aren't all over the place, and it would be a really easy way for teachers to keep track of what they've been doing. At the moment, English Australia can issue statements of attendance for live workshops and also for live webinars. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to register when somebody watches a recorded webinar. So we can't issue statements of attendance for when people listen to a recorded webinar. In the future, we would like to be able to, and we are moving to a new data system within the next year, and we're looking for that system to incorporate this feature. And then finally, as a future possibility, the steering group has discussed the possibility that there could be other English Australia frameworks. So we've created this CPD framework for teachers, but something that really came up in the consultation sessions with members was the idea of leadership and how could we incorporate leadership into the CPD framework. And I think the steering group and I really struggled with this idea, and in the end decided that it's probably something that belongs on a separate framework. And from there was born the idea of other frameworks in the future, for example, on leadership, or for people who work in student services, or for people who work in marketing in ELICOS, for example. So there's a picture of an oyster, just to signify that the world is your oyster. There are many possibilities for this, and hopefully the CPD framework will continue developing. And And hopefully that picture of the oyster didn't make you too hungry, because I know it does look like a shell chocolate. If you would like to know more about the English Australia CPD Framework, please visit our website. There's a lot of information on there, and hopefully it's displayed in a very user-friendly way, because our aim with the website was really for people, teachers and academic managers, to be able to read through things that they needed to read very quickly. So there's a lot of clickable items, so you can decide what you need to read and what you don't, and work out how to use it and start engaging with the framework straight away. Also, English Australia will be sending out a CPD framework brochure to each of our member colleges by the end of this month. So look out for that in the mail and display it somewhere in your staff room if possible. We'd really appreciate that. And finally, in the professional development updates that get emailed out by English Australia, there'll be ongoing information about the CPD framework. So these are just ways that you can find out more. We have some time now where we can take questions, or we'd love to hear your comments. So if you could type them in now, I'll be able to see them and I'll relay them to Dave and Claire, and we'll try our best to answer the questions. And if there are no questions, even comments would be that you would like to share with the audience would be great. Dave or Claire, is there anything that you'd like to say while we're waiting?
I'd like to know more about, if items are being removed, what the plans are for where they would be located, because obviously there's great resources there. So thinking that through about how we make those accessible once they've been removed.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So on the English Australia website, there's a page with all of the current professional development events, and from that page you can see where recorded webinars are housed. And so there's a member-only section of our website, and that has all the recorded versions of webinars, and it also has any materials which were distributed at live workshops as well. So that's where you find it, Claire. There's a member-only section on the website, and you do need your username and your login details for the English Australia website to access them at the moment. If you don't know what they are, then please send me an email and I can provide you with your login details for the English Australia website.
And the readings, for example, that might have been in the framework that at one stage might be later removed, that was what I was really talking about.
Okay. The readings
that are not already available.
The readings are things that are from the English Australia Journal, which are on our website as well, on the electronic copy of the journal. But yeah, I think we spoke about that all of the things that have been, this is a good point, Claire, we did speak about this the other day, all of the things that have been removed from the framework need to be housed in a location where people know that they once were on the framework and have now been removed, because they may want to direct people to those resources. So I'll create a page that's part of the CPD framework resources on our website that houses those links.
Yeah, that'd be good if it was, catalogued in some way, identified in some way, so people can find their way through that quite easily, following topics, for example.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. There's some questions and comments that have come through. It looks quite comprehensive. I'm excited to get started. Loud and clear, thank you. This is a question.
Because I was about to say that if it's not loud and clear,
It's a bit
Sarah
late.
and Jen are probably doing it again at the AIR conference in Hobart.
Oh, yeah. Yes, that's true. So the other two members of the steering committee are going to be presenting a similar session at the English Australia conference to this one. So the question is there any additional costs for members who embrace the framework? No. So it's a service that's free for all of our member colleges and for any staff that work in member colleges. Just finding some more questions. All right. I'm unsure about the reasoning behind repeating sessions between phases. Could you please clarify that? Dave or Claire, would you like to
Claire,
answer
would
that?
you like that one or me?
Yeah, we did talk about that because I wondered if it was a little bit repetitive. You know, if it's in one phase and you are interested in that, you can find it there. Why have it in another? But I think the general feeling was that people thought there might be some aspects there that, you know, if somebody's thinking, well, I'm a phase 2 here, and they ignore what might actually be available in an earlier one, I think, you know, we can keep thinking that one through because I'm not entirely convinced about that yet. I think when we see it in work, it'll be great. Sorry, Dave.
Oh, sorry, I was interrupting. My thought behind that was based on lesson observations in my head when I was dealing with this. Is I could have watched a lesson as a new teacher and got something out of it. But if I watch the same lesson again as a much more experienced teacher, I'd probably get a lot more different things from it. So having it in two places was, or more, was just an idea that just because one thing is good for phase 1 doesn't mean it's not going to be helpful for you in phase 2. And we didn't want to limit where people were looking, thinking, oh, I'm phase 2, I only want to get better, I'm not going to look at anything in phase 1.
And I think different teachers at different phases get different things out of activities as well. So that was also part of the reasoning. But yeah, I can see it's come up in another question. Someone asked if you did something in phase 1, do you skip it in phase 2? Which is a similar question. And I guess, yes, you probably wouldn't do the same thing again in phase 2.
No, but you might do a different variation of it.
Exactly.
Yes, definitely.
There's another question. Does the academic manager need teachers' permission to review their CPD profile? I think the way that it is now, teachers will be carrying around their own CPD profile. It's not going to be housed by any English Australia portal. And I really think that that's something that the manager and the teachers would have to agree on almost when the teacher starts working at a college. But I think that it will be a really helpful document in for teachers and for managers to discuss professional development opportunities and where teachers want to go with it. So we're seeing the document as something that's not really, you know, have you done enough PD this year, although it may be that, but more as, you know, this is what I'm interested in and what I've been doing, and this is what I have to show that. Did you want to say anything, Claire or Dave, about that?
I think the record template, if it is housed on the portal, needs to be for the individual to access, and then they decide what they share in order to, you know, continue that discussion with their academic manager. I think that's pretty important. If
it's housed by English Australia, it would definitely need to be, they would need to give permission for managers to access it.
Yeah.
My thought on it is that this is a CPD framework. It's for all of us to develop and get better. It's not a way of checking on your teachers. Use it for good, not evil.
You're wearing your Superman outfit.
You have no idea.
Star Wars.
I think that's important, though, to make that clear to people, when you're explaining it to staff, your own staff or to, colleagues, just to make that really clear. The aim is, continuing professional development. It's a tool to assist people. It's not to monitor them to death.
Yep. Claire, this might be a question for you, because I think it was you were the one who made this comment. Someone has said, I like your comment that phase 1 is not a deficit, but I wonder if teachers will see it that way.
I think that's part of our job, to explain it, to introduce it in the appropriate way when you start using it, or when you encourage your staff to start using it, and when you employ other people. It's, how you pitch it to people, how much they'll, get on board with you, what buy-in there will be. I think it's a fair point. People need to understand that it's recognising what their needs are and having those needs met. So identifying yourself as phase 1 in some areas, or phase 2 in some areas, whatever. We're not all going to be experts in everything.
I think it's probably it's probably not a deficit. It's more of an advantage, I would think, to be in phase 1. The last thing that you would want is a teacher who thinks that they're an expert at everything.
Exactly.
Because it's defeating the purpose of this whole CPD framework. I mean, even from my own perspective, I'd probably start off in phase 1 anyway, in terms of I'm actually interested in the things that are on there. I mean, I've seen what's on there. It's still useful to me now. It's just a whole lot of resources there that are going to help you, whether you're phase 1 or you're an expert. But it's the awareness of the fact that you can still develop that I think we need to encourage.
Yeah,
and that comes back to that step 4 point, with where your examples really fleshed that out, how it could be exploited.
Yeah. And the person who made that comment about the deficit has also said that I think the framework also looks at levels of self-awareness, which is very useful. So I think, what you guys are saying is that being aware of, the fact that things can always be helpful as well is interesting.
But it's great to have them housed in one location.
Yeah.
It's quite hard for people to keep track of things, and this is a great way to curate it all.
Yes.
There's also the fact that it's going to continue developing. It's great.
Someone has also commented that phases are not as important as the personal interest of teachers. And I think that's a very valid comment.
Good point.
Okay. There was another question. Sorry, I've just lost it. It says, looks great. Is any of it available for non-member colleges? Thank you. So at the moment, the English Australia webinars are available free to all staff who work at member colleges, and then non-members can attend at a cost. And it's similar with our live workshops as well. However, there are resources on the CPT framework which are not English Australia resources, which are completely free. So in that respect, those things would be available to staff from non-member colleges.
So are you saying that you don't need your member login in order to see all of these things?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and that's quite a good thing.
Yep.
Very generous.
All right. There's a few other comments. I finished my Masters in Applied Linguistics a few years ago, and some of the webinars are a great way to revise. Thank you. And then lots of people saying thank you and that they're excited to use the framework, which is excellent. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, we'll probably finish there. I'd like to say thank you to Dave and Claire for today's presentation and for all the work that you've done on the framework so far. And obviously you're key reference people for this project. So the work will continue. So thank you very much. If you would like to receive the English Australia professional development updates, then please email me, or if you need a login details for the website, then please email me as well. My email is up on the screen, and you can like us on Facebook as well, just to keep in the loop. All right, Claire and Dave, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
Okay.
Been good working with you.
And thank you everyone for attending today's session.